Conference, the Research and Postgraduate Department of English is much delighted to welcome you all to the fifth lecture on networking to translate race, gender, and class for the region. Let's begin our session by seeking the blessings of the Almighty. I welcome Uncle Joseph for invocation.
There shall be showers of blessing. This is the promise of love. There shall be seasons refreshing, sent from the Savior above. Showers of blessing, showers of blessings we need. Mercy drops round us are falling, but for the showers we plead. But for the showers we plead. But for the showers we plead.
I'm going to invite the Selfie Center, Assistant Professor of the Department, to welcome you all and to introduce our speaker, all of you.
Yes.
The most distinguished dignitaries, honored auxiliaries, and of requested brilliance who have assembled here in this online platform, a warm good morning to all. When the dawn breaks for the first session of the invited lectures of the third day of the International E-Conference on Voice in the Region, the Regional Talk in Cultural Studies, it is a great privilege to welcome the most respected resource person of the nation, Dr. Krishnan. He has taught the last 8 decades to introduce study. I will fail in my attempt, and I know it is always full of it.
Can you please bring that geo here?
Yes.
You have plugged it in inside. Maybe that's why it's not here.
Only because Dr. Krishnan is such a multi-faceted personality who can uncover and subdue any aspect of the love. A very good Bible, a confident humanitarian, a peace lover, and a trusted translator, and an independent editor. She is already probably the one. One of my young parents in Bengaluru, Dr. Krishnan has her degrees in English literature from Bangalore and Delhi universities. She was branch editor of Macmillan India.
I don't know why it's not here. Because I'm not on Geo.
Editor of Oxford University.
No, Geo is connected.
2018.
Very sorry for the interruption. I'm continuing. During her career, she sourced, edited, and promoted translations of works by Indian authors belonging to 13 languages. Much of this got great acceptance in the form of national prizes and adoption as study materials in both Indian and overseas universities. She is currently coordinating multiple publishers to build a program of Tamil English translation, an initiative of Tamil Nadu government. She is the founding editor of the South Asian Women Writers website commissioned by the British Council. Apart from this, she sources and edits short stories in translation for The Hindu and The Week. She writes on translation in the prestigious newspapers like The Hindu and the Deccan Herald. She has also served on the Film Censor Board, the Central Sahitya Akademi Panel for Translation Awards, and the panel for nominations to the Raman Magsaysay Award. Her scholarship is litmus tested by time itself and is evident in the lectures on translation she has delivered at prestigious universities like Cambridge, Leeds, Warwick, and Austin. She was also a scholar in residence in Davidson College, North Carolina. Moreover, she was invited by the French government to speak to French publishers about Indian literatures in 2001. In fact, her contributions in the editing of translated works of Dalit and women literature are truly unparalleled. In fact, she is unparalleled in her commitment, passion, and determination in her area of editing. And let me conclude with her own words. I wish I had 1 crore of rupees. I would have commissioned 100 translations, given bursaries of 2 translators, settled authors with handsome fees and 100 over the translations to publishers and said, "Thou shalt publish." Most welcome, Dr. Mini Krishnan. Thank you.
Thank you. Am I audible? Can you hear
Yes,
me?
ma'am.
Okay,
Yes,
good.
ma'am.
First of all, I'm quite taken aback by all those extremely superlative descriptions. I think only the last line is accurate. Some of the other things. By the way, I'm not doctor. I keep on telling all my hosts I'm not a doctorate. And I have no scholarship at all. And any success I have is also because of the wonderful translators I have worked with and their faith in me. So thank you very much for this invitation. Bella, how do I get my paper on the thing? Sorry, I'm a bit of a dud in this. I minimize this?
Yeah, minimize.
Is this it?
No, not this.
This it?
Minimize it. Yes, okay.
Ah, at last. Yes, after hearing Arago yesterday, I was a little quelled. First of all, I can't grasp some of the complex ideas that he was putting across. I mean, I don't know how to transmute it into my talk. So I thought I'll tell you that many, many years ago, when I was about 10, when Swami Chinmayanda came to speak in our school. Those days he was not so famous. This was in Bangalore, and my father and he were friends, so he came to speak, and the last minute my school captain changed the topic and told me, "You go and tell Swamiji that we changed the topic." So I went to him and said, "Swamiji, he changed the topic, something about girls in society or something." So he said, "You keep whatever topic you want. I will say what I have to say." So like that, I thought I will take this opportunity just to tell you what publishers see. Publishing is really a social mission. Of late, we've come under greater pressure than we used to earlier, when it was an editorial-driven industry. Now increasingly, because of globalization and the huge economic pressures from outside the country, all the publishers are under tremendous pressure to show a profit on nearly every book. The truth is that it is books that are not immediately profitable that are actually valuable. So there is a huge conflict when the editors want to do something, and even the managing director of chief publisher. Different publishing houses have different strategies of, different levels of management. Even if they want to publish something, the sales people and the marketing people are extremely powerful, and they'll say, "Look, unless we can sell so many copies, you can't publish." So first of all, I want to give you that background. In Indian publishing, in English language publishing, where we have all the protocols, we have to pay people to resource persons to review, and you can't just publish, go out and just print. Editing is expensive, all these things. So I just want to say that what I'm about to show you, kind of mapping India, mapping our culture, mapping our histories. And like I was said, most people think that, talking about the regional turn is really talking about regional literature, but I don't know anything else, so I'll just have to explain those things. So first of all, I want to thank you for this opportunity to address the students and teachers of English literature of Newman College. And Cardinal Newman said, that a writer is someone who not only has something to say, but knows how to say it. So I hope that I have something to share about writers and will be able to share it intelligibly. I always say, whenever I get the chance to talk to English literature people, that the literature faculty everywhere in India is the only faculty which can, through language, through literary heritage, and social ideals, knit the country, mapping the vast storehouse of human experience and sharing it is a great responsibility because you not only enable students to become uh, members of the workforce, earn a living, but you also train them. That is something that's hidden. Train them to apply critical thinking in order to deal with a complex world. And increasingly in the other areas of life, vocabulary is dipping, whereas here you consciously and subconsciously help your students to build up a good database of vocabulary because words link with thoughts, with meaning. And if you don't have a language, if you don't have words, you won't be able to express yourself. This is a great mistake that's happened in our education system. I think the regional language schools may be doing a better job, but the English medium schools, what's happening is there's no emphasis on the English language, there's no emphasis on the regional language, there's no emphasis on the mother tongue because that is lost long before the child can, the brain develops. And so actually the child grows up without a proper vocabulary. And no matter what they enter, whether it's the hotel business or IT or whatever it is, when you're in a meeting, when there's things become a little chaotic, when there are conflicts at work, you just don't have the language to resolve a crisis, to make another person understand the way you feel, or to even empathize and say, look, I know how you feel. And get the words across because they just don't have the language. So your faculty is actually extremely doing a very, very important thing. And I would also encourage you to have as resource persons people from the language departments in your college. But what I want to say is, today literature is so much more than just fine writing. It straddles anthropology and culture. It's a huge field where politics, sociology, history, and the material aspects of our lives fuse. And the zone of translation, and this is what I want to say, in the study and interpretation of culture is too obvious to be argued. Therefore, I congratulate the college and the organizers for this topic and giving us an opportunity to talk about it. I'm sorry I missed Harish's talk. I'm in great, I have the book here, translate. I'm in great admiration of that translation. I really don't know how she did it. It's a fantastic work. The other thing I want to say is, for a very long time, till very recently, English literature, teachers in English literature were a little apologetic about teaching translation. They were not sure, is it in some sense are texts inferior to the texts, the canonical works set in place for years and years. I can understand that hesitation because critical material on our writing is not available in English. It may be in the regional language. And even there, we're not very sure about how they've been, Argo used a word yesterday that there's no possibly not the kind of rigor that there has been and what we see in the English, in the Anglophone worlds. But without the unfolding of this indigenous knowledge and indigenous creative writing which has recorded our lives in our languages, I would say that the whole idea of educating the young is in vain. We may be able to train their intellects to think in a certain way and to process the world, but for deeper insights that spring from a bilingual way of thinking, perhaps even trilingual, we really need our own texts. And this is what we're about to lose, and your generation is the last bastion. After you, it'll just be an abyss for us. you don't realize the danger we're in. See, most Indians, you take award winners in science, young scientist award, the best engineer of the year, best passing out medical student of the year. You ask them to name the great writers, even in their own languages, just 3 or 4 names, they won't know. Now that's a huge loss. It's like forgetting it's like forgetting your name, forgetting yourself, forgetting your address. So all the more reason to look at translation into English, because this is the language that links everybody in the classroom. There may be people from so many other regions of society. Yesterday, there's somebody from the Northeast who said, how do we read these texts? How do you view these texts? You can't expect everyone to know the regional language of the school or college they happen to be admitted in, because life is unexpected, unpredictable. You may be moving around. So this respect for local genius and taking our writers seriously, I think is a great change which has come now, and I see great hope. But one of the things our teachers must recognize and keep in mind is that though our country is politically independent, our economy is still controlled by the dominant economic forces outside, and this affects the culture and the psyche of the nation. I'm terrified of this handheld internet, because it just goes on in a passive way, stimulating the mind with all sorts of junk. It prevents deep thinking, reflective thinking. So all the more literature is important, because literature is about feelings, about ideas, about people's human behavior. Yesterday there was a remark about environmental literature. These are huge ideas and concepts which need a lot of discussion, and it's so new. And we have writers, you have writers in your region, like who's the writer who wrote in Mekaji, I've forgotten the name, and Sarah Joseph, ecofeminism. There's so much to discuss. There's Narayan, the Adivasi and Narayan, who wrote about charity, and so many short stories. A wonderful story, Dain Varika, which is actually a metaphor for environmental nature, degradation of nature, and how it affects, how it destroys, can destroy a family, destroy life itself. So, the other thing I would say is our constant seeking for validation from the West. For instance, your poster, that concept thing that you circulated, it says, to globalize regional voices that are often left unnoticed. But at one time, I too believe this. I was crazy about getting my books across. Somebody has to. I want it reviewed in the Times supplement. I want it reviewed here or there. But more recently, I've come to the conclusion that it doesn't matter if the rest of the globe doesn't notice us. As long as we take notice of ourselves, take ourselves seriously, that is the important thing, and future generations will depend on that. The real validation must come from within our peoples, their languages, their culture, their needs. Now, the region is expressed in land and language. That's why so many things which, yesterday I was reading an old Anantamurthy story. There's a description of a man, he's so subtle, it says that it's like drawing a strand of hair through butter. That's how he approaches a problem. How he solves a problem. That sort of thing. Or, Madila Pune, which is in Tamil, that is the cat in your lap, which is someone who's so close to you, you just wouldn't suspect that person or that creature or whatever, that person actually, of doing anything against you. Something's going wrong around you, you look for, the peg to hang on, but actually it's Madila Pune, the cat in your lap. These sort of phrases, these things come from it's so very ethnic that it's difficult to get those equivalents. But you see, we shouldn't lose those phrases. There's so many phrases like that in Malayalam also, but what is that? I remember that. We had a tough time translating that in Madhava Kunjapatan's Prashta. There's so much there. And if you know all the languages of the world and you don't know your mother tongue, that is enslavement. But if you know your mother tongue and add all the languages of the world to it, that is empowerment. It's worth remembering. So, see, it's not too late for your students. They can still be bilingual and use the force of both languages. It's worth remembering that many of our most famous Indian writers are or were bilingual. Ananta Murthy, Paul Zachariah, Manoj Das, Navanita Dev Sen, Mridula Garg, Ashok Mitran, Girish Karnad, Ambai, and as you know, K. Sachidanandan, our own Kerala man, writes poetry in both Malayalam and English. Now, India as a country, as a nation state, was a British idea. The reason I'm saying all this is because I have to give you this context before I show you the kind of books that were selected, that translators agreed to translate. Don't think that everybody rushes to translate. Many people have to be persuaded to translate or persuaded about the value of the work. India as a country was a British idea. So the idea of English is as good or as bad as the idea of India itself. Writing or speaking in English is not a tribute to the British Empire. It is a practical solution to the circumstances created by it. An empire, there's a lovely quotation from Rushdie. An empire does not end the day after the rulers leave. I like that very much. Fundamentally, India is in many ways still an empire. Its territory is held together by armed forces, administration, etc. India as a literary category is a new idea. We have had the literatures of our part of the world collectively described under different labels. You know this: Commonwealth literature, Third World literature, and so on. The rise of modern Indian literature in English coincided with nationalist and political ideologies produced by the elite. It was a new literature in which colonization and the national movement resulted in a kind of fiction characterized by Western forms of writing and local themes. It is worth noticing that writers like Kamala Markandeya, Nayantara Sahagal, still writing, and Rajaram did not work to revitalize the Indian language novel, but the Indo-European tradition. So younger faculty like yourselves today will wonder why, after more than 60 years of independence, things have not changed in India as they have. For instance, in Australia, where English literature is only one of the literatures taught alongside American and Australian, though they, like us, began with this English literature. So I'll skip all this. And then, again, I want to say this. For at least 3 generations, we have accepted evaluations of ourselves prepared by Anglo-centric intellectuals and commentators. They are very useful and scholarly, but are they the full picture? What do our Indian texts carry that might enlarge the map of it? You know, whether it's a biography, an autobiography, a poem. Sometimes a poem lives with you your whole life. These are lines you can never forget. It just becomes a part of you. So we have, you see, these riches to carry. So our literary works show the culture of everyday practices, culture of shared traditions, and among, okay, I'll skip all this. And I'm also looking forward to a good interactive discussion where I can respond to the doubts or the questions that you have concerning translation and publishing. I just want to, the 3 categories of students, I would say, who come out of English medium schools like I did. There are those who have not lost their grip on their mother tongues. You know, we would have people very committed to the mother tongue at home who buy the newspapers, who listen to the news, who watch those films, who have a good collection of books. Then there are people who, having lost their languages or moved away from their regional linguistic regions, they become what I call language orphans. And so, because you have to function in a language, and that becomes the English language. Your friends all speak that, so you embrace the English language. You're somewhat overwhelmed by it. You might even see it as a superior language, and it also becomes the language through which all your information, your knowledge systems, all this comes only through that language. it's very easy to just enter the tunnel and be absorbed in it. But you see, you may not be able to read your language, your regional language, your mother tongue, but you function very well in it. So translation is actually for that market in our country, where you're very comfortable in your culture, but you can't read your language. And the third group of people are those who experience the power of English, but know, and I think these people actually go through a little tragedy. I would see, I don't know Malayalam as well I know English. I can read Malayalam. I can't read classical Malayalam. I cannot read very complex prose, political treatises. And I can't sometimes make out, I can't tell sarcasm, and I can't always make out satire and sarcasm. That's my deficiency when I read fiction or poetry. So those people know that real self-discovery can come only through the mother tongue, or identifying with, the myths, the patterns that lie locked in it. So I will present through published books the power of translation to unite, to recreate, to build new worlds, and fashion fresh possibilities. Because I believe that this activity, literary activity, without this we are deaf to each other. We cannot stay connected, and this linking, cross-fertilization of minds. Now nobody needs to be convinced about it, but people still need convincing about accepting this as deep research, the PhD work. I'm sorry, I don't know where translation stands in terms of doctoral work. I remember some time ago, Chitra Bankar had some difficulty when she, I think it was in Hyderabad, where she wanted to present translated work as part of her PhD. There's some problem like that. It should really be recognized as a serious contribution. So let me say how publishing as a social mission and livelihood, it's not well paid, but it's satisfying. How this philosophy of publishing can make available a record of social history in a creative way. I can speak only for myself and the teams I have worked with. So I will open with a very short program that the Elthachan University, Malayalam University, set in motion 6 years ago. But then it fell apart when the Vice Chancellorship changed hands. Now, there was a plan. See, this is why it's important to have a group of people selecting works for either students to read or general publishing. Because otherwise, you're left to the whims of publishers, English language publishers, who are not the most well-informed, who may not be. Of course, there are some people who are continuously being advised by people who know far more than they. But these things tend to be kept confidential. You don't want too many people to know your plans. Just a careless word here or there, and somebody else might pick up an idea which you would tell yourself, okay, I can't do it this year, I'll do it next year. So there are a whole lot of things go into decision making and the sharing or otherwise of ideas and what texts to translate. Yesterday I asked Dr. Argarson which books he would choose to introduce the region to students of this college. And once again, I didn't quite understand when he said Parisal Kadai for Kerala. But I was thinking in another way, if I were teaching a course on, let's say, the novel, because there's just that much you can do with short stories, to show the development of ideas and themes. 3 novels, one of which I don't have with me. I had only a cover, which I can't show you because this PowerPoint is not showing itself. 3 books which OUP published. The originals were published more or less at the same time. You are very familiar with this in Indulekha. Is this clear?
Yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am. Yes.
This, of course, It's, I think, also widely prescribed. Now, this is Indira Bai, published at almost the same time in Kannada by Gulwadi Venkatarao. 80, yeah. But you see, the thing is, unusually, and the third book I would want to show you is Saguna, but I don't have it. It's strangely the first autobiographical novel written in English, and it shows, how a woman struggles. It talks about conversion, it talks about education, the confrontation between various social forces, and look at the tissue jacket here. Yeah. Whereas this Gulwadi Venkatarao's book Indira Bai is a fantastic work. It has almost the entire microcosm or macrocosm, whatever you call it, of that Saraswat community in Karnataka. Rich Brahmin family looking for a groom for their daughter. An educated, again, as an Indulekar, there's an educated but poor boy being raised in another family. They try to marry her off within their community to somebody else. The interesting thing in that book is they show Gulwadi has presented different registers, not just the educated Kannada. You have the Kannada of the women folk, you have the folk songs, you have the Sanskrit chants, you have Konkani, because that's a region which has Konkani and Tulu. Now, for each of these things, the two translators, that is Vanamala and what is the other translator's name? Sorry, Shivrama Karant. Sorry, Shivrama, beg your pardon, Shivrama Padikal. Well, Vanamala did most of the work. He wrote up all the introduction or the outer work mostly. But they found the language in English to carry this through. It took them a very long time, more than 2 years. It's not a very big book. And working with them was a real revelation for me. It was one of the last books I did with OUP. And the other thing we did was we used different kinds of fonts in English to indicate, okay, this is Tulu, this is Konkani, these are the folk songs. That's something they managed. That was, I would say, a publishing feat. Translators are wonderful here. I would actually request teachers to do this comparison. You do Induleka, you do Indira Bai, and you look at Saguna. There may be, of course, other books, but time is limited, and in a semester you won't have much time. And then, if you were to look at a very modern novel about women, I mean, I don't have to make. There's so many you can. At one time, women's writing was suppressed and marginalized. No longer that way. It's really women who are really leading the field in many ways. But what I want to show you is the selection that the advisory board of the Thodupuzha Malayalam University made. One was Rajalakshmi's work. There were short stories which the Samyukta journal had done when they did their special on her many years ago. I forget now which year that was. 2012, I think it was. I don't know, further back. And then a novella of hers. So we put a novella and stories together to do this, A Path and Many Shadows and 12 Stories. That was one. Fiction, of course. And then, and that was published by Oriental Woman. Rosie Thomas's My Beloved C.J. A lot of repetition in this, but it's so frank, especially coming from that community, which is not encouraged to be, particularly the women. That was published by Women Unlimited, translated by G.R. Rinma, a famous scholar. Then there was Lalita Ambidantarjanam's short stories. Again, the selection. See, in fact, the advisory committee, which is made up largely of men, chose mostly women writers. And that was translated by J. Devika. Again, we had Khadija Mumtaz Barsa, quite a controversial novel. In fact, one of the translators who backed off and wanted to be translated by Sharif wanted to remain, in the shadows, was because her family wasn't happy that she had translated such a work, which is a very frank account. So you see, you have an attempt at least to show the social fabric, different backgrounds, different times. And then Professor Yeshadasan brought to our notice Nyarugal, which was put together by Renu Kumar, short stories only by Dalit writers, and beautifully translated by Abhirami and Ravi Shankar, published by Navayana. There's a story there which is just one page, in which the student is asked to submit her caste certificate, and she says no. Then he said, then we can't accept your application. Then she says, in that case, I don't want to be considered at all. It's just one page. And this is the book. The writer I was trying to, Ambika, Manga. I was trying to get this name. This is. I'm sure all of you know, being from Kerala, being from Thodupuzha, what this book is about, and how it says the time has come when nature says no. Sugata Kumari said that in her review. So that's something I want to show you. Then thereafter, if you're looking at marginalized writing, which is now moving very fast from the margins into the center, we did again from your region, but probably the first Malayalam Dalit work, which is Susie Taro calls it one of the founding texts of the Dalit Christian movement, Paul Chirakono's Mulayatara. And this writer, who is from Oriya, not enough has been done for Oriya language in translation. I think it is a shortage of translators, unlike Tamil and Kannada and Malayalam. Akila Nayak, this is really, Akila Nayak calls it a novel, but it really isn't a novel. It's his own life. Translated by Raj Kumar, who's now the head of the English department in Delhi University. The translation of this title was impossible in English, actually, so we just left it as Veda. That Veda Buddhi in Vedanta is the difference which you shouldn't have. That instead, it's the opposite of Samadarshana. So we just couldn't get the correct word. Finally, Rajkumar and I decided to just leave it at that. Punjabi, again, a language which hasn't moved as fast as it should. It's called Changiya Rukh, but actually means a tree that's lopped off. So we thought the English title, lopped tree or lopped something wouldn't sound so great. So we thought, the translator and I, Tripti is no more, this is 10 years ago, Against the Night might be, because the struggle is so intense. And also, the contradiction here is that the writer and the community is the Sikh community, where there's not supposed to be caste. Just like the Christian community, where there's not supposed to be caste. The Pope said a long time ago, not this Pope, the Pope before, he said, if you're a Christian, there is no such thing as caste. But unfortunately, it's so deeply ingrained in our country that caste is stronger than even faith. And this is by an award-winning writer, Chodharman Kugai. There are many more, but I don't want to go and show you this thing. Very quickly, this is a collection of Dalit writing, 58 writers, which Dasan and Chandrika and Pradeepan put together, again 10 years ago. This is what Dr. Aragarsan and Ravi Kumar, the Dalit ideologue, and he's now a politician, did for Tamil. And why I'm bringing this to your notice, this is Telugu, 89 writers. Why I bring this to your notice is in translation, there is an interest which we are able to meet, which actually has not been met in the original languages. There is no anthology of Dalit writing in Telugu. There is no collection of Malayalam Dalit writing in Malayalam, nor is there in Tamil. In fact, there was a suggestion that these books could be, as they made up the collections, the editors wondered if it couldn't be brought out in Tamil. But then, as you know, it is a highly conflicted area. There's a lot of politics amongst the Dalit communities themselves. In Tamil Nadu, there are something like 72 categories. And of course, we were strongly criticized, saying that, oh, why am I not in that anthology? You looked at only one group, one category. Now, one of the things that I hope translation of our writings brings forward is non-fiction. Somehow fiction has got such a grip on the market and the popular imagination. And of course, it's wonderful. As definitely students of literature know, many first novels are actually not novels. They spring from personal experience. But three books which I'm particularly happy as able to publish. One is Johnny Miranda's book. This is the first Parangi novel which we were able to bring out in English, and Johnny became extremely well known. The original was published a very long time ago, 2004. I had no idea that such a work had come out. But Sajai Jones, the translator, sent me the script. Took a very long time to polish and bring into a level which was acceptable to him, acceptable to the reviewers. But it's come out very well, and it's part of the Creole literature, which is talked about all over the world. Another book which I would encourage at least perhaps a few chapters of this, which might be read in class, which is so unusual because it's about travels in the deserts of Arabia. It's by Muzaffar. He's not too far away from you. You can even invite him to come and speak to you. In fact, I think he knows Arabic as well. It's tremendously, it's another world altogether, traveling in the desert. You think the desert is absolutely dry, but no. A few drops of rain and you see plants and flowers popping up everywhere. And the very unusual kind of, since you don't know enough about it, it's not that well documented. As they travel in the desert, they come across buildings that are covered over by sands. Buildings that are really very, very old and not been documented. In fact, it's almost impossible to do the kind of archaeology they do in less challenging sites of the world, geographic sites. And then again, this was a prize-winning work which Catherine Tangama translated. It's called Charity by Narayan. Again, this book, the Malayalam itself, Narayan had a very difficult time. You see, he literally translated his dialect into the kind of Malayalam that could be published and read by Malayalam reading public used to a certain culture of readership. And from that for Catherine to translate. So I don't know how successful it is if you look at the original, what must have been in Narayan's mind and how it appeared in English. Of course, it won an award, and it was quite a feat, but I'm sure we've lost 50%, perhaps even more. But that's a thing. And then women writers. Again, if you were looking at women writers, you could look at some of the really famous ones. You have Ambai, who's just won the Sahitya Academy Award. Of course, she should have won it a long time ago. Short stories. This is a fantastic novel. You could If you were looking at caste and social patterns, you could look at this book, which is actually called Asprushyaro, The Untouchables, but the translator selected this title from the phrase Vasudeva Kutumbam, Vasudeva's family, because there is a man named Vasudeva in it. Now, in this book, you have different levels. You have the grandmother, the mother, the children, the servants, and stuff. So everybody is looking down on somebody else. At the same time, everyone lives together, everyone gets along together. So, if you could look at this book, have you got a copy of Bharati Pura? If you study this Bharati Pura and a book which I edited but didn't publish, Penguin published it. If you can find Kavya, I can show that. This book, Anantamurthi's Bharati Pura, but I think they were published at more or less the same time. And then, who's the writer? I'm sure you've heard of Arvind Malagati's autobiography, Part 1, Government Brahmana, which was published by Orient Longman, Orient Black Swan as it is called now. This is Bharati Pura. This too is caste and professional, functioning in both English and in Kannada. If you were to study Bharati Pura, Vasudeva's family, and Malagati's Karya, again translated by Sushila Pandita, published by Penguin, this is published last year, you'll get a fantastic idea of the social blocks, where they intertwine, where they refuse to fuse, where they refuse to function in Karnataka. I would suggest Kusumabali, which also I published, but I don't think it's a good translation. Though it was widely praised and it sold very well, it reprinted. Because so much of it is poetry, I don't think we were able to bring that through. Actually, I didn't edit it properly at all. So the translator's friend in Bangalore, he polished it even harder. So I put his name along with mine on the title page. 3 other books. How so? Okay. 3 other books. This you may have heard of. It won an award. Sarah Joseph's Odapur, about a woman decamping from the church and what her life becomes after that. Navanita Dev Sen's marvelous travelogue, how she just jumps on a truck and goes all the way up to, where did she go? Yes, she goes to the Indo-Tibetan border because she's always wanted to visit the monasteries and areas there. And this from Korea. So I see I've reached it's nearly 11 o'clock. So this is just what I wanted to say, that the huge range, I mean, this is nothing at all. The young woman who introduced me very kindly said, she's done this, she's done that. Actually, I haven't even scratched the surface. With some luck, I got some funding and also 2 big publishers who published some of the books that I was able to source. But I would encourage bilingualists in your classrooms and the faculty in your staff rooms to look at what you could do together to encourage bilinguality and translating from English into Malayalam and the other way around, and any other language. I mean, who's the person from the Northeast who spoke yesterday? Maybe you could look at writings from his region, bring it into Malayalam. One of the things that was done, an Oriya work I published 3 years ago, was a book called Basanti, which is a novel it was an experiment, of course. 9 Oriya novelists were each asked to write a chapter. Was a general theme was circulated. Each of them wrote a chapter. So if something like that can be done the other way around, that is, you take a work, and if there are 10 chapters, 10 different people, 10 different students who translate it and then exchange each other's work and look at that. I know that Ram, who's part of this, Rav Sharma and Mani Seshadri, translated 13 or 14 short stories from Tamil. And they also looked at each other's work. I'd like to just show you, is it possible to show the Tamil PowerPoint? The PowerPoint we can't show. Okay, forget it, doesn't matter. No, I don't want to show that. There's just one last book I want to show you, if you can get, if we can have Thodupuzha's book. Okay. I'm so sorry, but I goofed with the PowerPoint. Yes, so that I've come to the end of my talk, and I would just encourage you to read more and have more discussions about different kinds of books. There's one book which I particularly wanted to share, and that was a translation from the Tamil by G. Geeta of Joe DeCruz's book Ari Sur Ulaga, which is Ocean Rimmed World. It's probably the first novel, again, so much of autobiography in it, about the coastal community, the fisherfolk community, their lives, how risky it is, how they're always living on the edge. It's a book I wanted to share, but I'm unable to show you that the cover. It's by Joe DeCruz, Ocean Rimmed World. If you were to look at writings about coastal Karnataka, your own, maybe Tagari's works or other works set in the fisher folks community, the Mukuan community, and look at this book, it would be a very nice comparative study of that community, how people live in coastal, which they say, according to weather forecast, the climate specialists, that we will soon lose. This might be a world that we lose over the next 10 years. I'd be happy to take questions about anything to do with publishing, anything to do with translation. Can you turn off the AC? Yeah, so I've come to the end of my talk. Thank you very much for listening to me.
Thank you so much, ma'am. I would like to, I'm Ajomi. I want to make a question. I want to ask you a question.
Yes.
Am I audible?
Yes. In fact, I'd prefer an audio thing. Otherwise, I have to go to the chat box and try to read and all that. I'm not good at that. Yeah. Fire away.
Okay. My question is that from school days onwards, is there any strategy to build some interest in translation among our students? Because usually we are not too much into it. Rather than the theory part we are having in our translation purpose, we do not know how to translate.
Yes.
We may be knowing two languages, we may be speaking 2 languages, but actually we don't know what are the core things in translating. So unless and until we are not doing translations, but just learning the theory alone, there is no use. That's what I feel. So is there any strategy that, yeah.
Yes. None at all. Forget theory. All the big translators, when they translate, I'm sure they don't think about theory. That may come later, or they ask somebody. The main thing is your bilinguality. You can start with nursery rhymes, with film songs, any poem that you teach, either in Malayalam or in English. Tell the students, just translate it into. They don't even need to write it down. They can do oral translations in class. How would you translate this line? And you will get, if there are 30 students, you'll get 30 different versions. And that is the joy of translation. There's no such thing as the perfect translation. Whatever approximates, yes. I mean, if it's like the cat sat on the mat, then that's not poetry. But if you take, in any poem you take, ask the class to translate it. Or maybe even advertisements. You can train them. You make it easy, make it joyful, because only that way the children will learn. Anything that catches their fancy. Just bring the newspaper to the older classrooms when the children are maybe 8th standard, 9th standard. You can say now, okay, this is the headline. How would you translate it into language A, language B, language C? Because you must be having a mix in your classroom. Next question.
Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you, Mini. I typed in the chat box, but anyhow,
Okay.
I can. Yeah.
So shall I read it for you, ma'am?
Yeah. Please.
Theories of translation take center stage in translation study paper, mostly outside. If you plan a compilation of translators' notes, it may be included. Oh, that's a fantastic idea. In fact, I wanted to do that. I asked my former publishing director. I also shared it with GS Jayashree. I said, if we collect the translator's notes, especially Francis Pritchard's notes to Basti, it's a fantastic thing. If you compile those notes, that will actually be, translation in practice. I also tried to do a book, and Alladi Uma and Sridhar contributed a very nice, which I can share actually. Ajomi, I'll send it to you and you can share it with the others. I'm very much against this theory. Theory is like a huge wall. What is the use of theory if the students have no practice? Never mind if they make mistakes, and who does a perfect translation? Let anyone translate anything. They must get into the joy of bilinguality and seeing how it brings a certain force, this combined force of two languages. They themselves feel so energized. Yeah, and next question.
Ma'am, I have one from here.
Yes, Ram?
I just wanted to understand, say if there is a new form of text, say there is short fiction published for the publication industry, there is essays published, novels published. But if you want to bring out a new form, like what algorithms are suggested now, compiling translator notes together, or compiling prefaces together from different Dalit writers or something like that, where does it originate? Does it originate from an editor, or again, is a publisher the one to check the marketability of such an endeavor? Where does it start?
Yeah, it always starts in the fertile brain of someone who, like S. Ramakrishnan said, who specializes in books that don't sell. The thing is, in big publishing houses, the editors come up with lots of ideas. Then you have a huge stable of champion translators and writers. They will also give you ideas. And these things come together. But the problem is, in a big publishing house, 2 or 3 levels of decision making have to, the idea is to get past all of them for you to even start. In a small publishing house, like Navayana, like maybe Speaking Tiger, like Zuban, like Women Unlimited, you can do what you like, because you don't have to get past 3 or 4 directors and committees and reviewers and so on. And if the person who's outside the publishing house has this idea, and you have a little funding with you, that will make it'll lubricate the process. So that's my answer to an unusual.
Okay. And if it's one of these small publishing houses, how does it tackle the problem of marketability? How do they even go around that?
No. Marketability, the thing is, like I said at the very beginning, a really good work, a very new idea takes time to catch on.
Right.
But if you are well networked into the social media, and you have 1 or 2 good reviewers who can write up your thing, or even a whispering campaign, in the sense X tells Y tells his network, and say that, look, such a work is coming. And in translation, there is actually a sort of a coterie and also a family which might support this. Or I've always worked with education companies. Those who also have a link there. One of the best things would be to convince 2 or 3 studies that such a work would be extremely useful if you were to prescribe at the MA level. Or if it's just one language, you could approach somebody like the Tamil Nadu Textbook Corporation and say that here's a very valuable set of documents from 10 or 15 translators, and would you consider lifting 500 copies of it if a particular publisher were to bring it out? Marketability is a very, very iffy thing. Sometimes a book when I published Karakar 21 years ago, nobody thought it would sell. The publishing house was least interested. Macmillan was least interested. Fortunately, there were 2 reviews, and even more fortunately, the marketing director in Macmillan in Delhi submitted the book to the Crossword Award jury, and even more amazingly, it won a prize for fiction, which it isn't. It's an autobiography. So that's a very, you really can't tell. Publishers like Penguin, Harper, and all have a tremendous network. Before K.R. Meera's book comes out, 4 or 5 people will write to me saying that we want to interview you about Malayalam translations or Malayalam women writers. And then I know that something's happened. So they will talk to a number of publishers, and there'll be a couple of, articles about Malayalam women writers, about translations, this, that, the other, and boom, there'll be K.R. Meera's book will be the next. If your marketing team in that particular publishing house has that network, then they start, the machine will start running before the book comes out, and that's how it should be. And then, of course, we can't have literature festivals, but literature festivals is a great place for writers and translators because they would be invited, they would meet there. It's a fantastic, I wish this was a face-to-face thing. It's wonderful to have an audience where you make eye contact and they also feel, there is that human element where you stand up and ask questions or you challenge the speaker. There's so much of interaction. So much can be learned at literature festivals. So these are all things that are now cut off. Of course, these kind of talks are also helpful in terms of establishing platforms where ideas and connectivities can, springboard and take off.
True. Thank you, ma'am.
Ma'am,
yes?
Myself, Matthew Kurian from Newman College.
Yes.
Okay. In connection with what Ms. Ajome has asked, let me ask you a question. There is both translation and transcreation.
Yes.
So do you think that translation is kind of limiting as it's an exact rendering of text while transcreation allows more artistic license?
Actually, there are all these, anyone who sets out to translate has to face 2 lobbies. One lobby will say it has to be a literal translation and in great English. I know what they mean by great English. Otherwise, it's not successful. The other team will say, the other block will say, we don't want the literal translation. It should be more creative. It should be like this. It should be like that. It should be paraphrased. That's very difficult to adjudicate and to sort of. All translation, any good translation has to be creative, and you have to be creative when you translate. It's no use being a Xerox copy. You have to create that work in the culture of another language, whether it is Malayalam into Kannada, Malayalam into Hindi, or Hindi into English, or Bengali into English. And it is now very widely accepted that you can bring in words from the original language where it works, where you're starting with simple things like kinship terms to those objects from material objects which simply don't have the English equivalent. So my answer to that is all translation is actually transcreation. In some places, you will find that the translators actually paraphrasing because it's just impossible for them to translate it because the equivalents are not available. Don't worry. Forget about this literal translation and, should I be like this or should I be like that? Let me tell you what Martha Selby told me when she translates. And she is a very successful translator from both Sanskrit, that of course, medieval and ancient Sanskrit, and Tamil, both ancient Tamil and contemporary. What she does is, she says, my first draft is a literal draft because I want to make sure that I haven't missed anything. Then I start polishing and recreating and transcreating to make it readable to somebody who doesn't know Tamil at all. Okay?
Yes, ma'am. Thank you. Thank you.
Hello, ma'am.
Hi.
I'm Pooja Raju, postgraduate student from Newman College.
Yes,
So
Pooja.
I would like to know about your opinion about are theories actually something that constrains one's own creative space or something that intrudes into one's own creativity?
Yeah, I can't stand theory. I know it's necessary when you study, and of course, it's a nice framework to that. But that's the problem with theories and with academic assessments, because they must have a framework, and that's how you study. That's how that line develops as research and as and that's the system that we've inherited from the people who set up our educational patterns, and it's useful. Theory is useful, but when you're being creative, I would say theory is a huge hurdle. So take your theory books and lock it up and just sit with your dictionary to help you. Keep a thesaurus, that will be even more useful. And your text, whatever you're going to translate, read it over and over and over again. Try to even, it'll become part of you. You'll know almost one by heart. And then you start to translate. After you translate, whatever it is, 10 pages, 2 pages, 20 pages, put it away for a few days. Pick it up again. Make somebody else read it. Read it out to yourself and read it aloud. I always encourage my translators to read the material aloud, because then you will get that rhythm. Is it the same as what I read? Sometimes you will get up early in the morning and say, that's not how it should be. This is how it should be. So translation will be with you all the time as you read. Don't be afraid of theory. Just build your vocabulary. And that's the other thing. Read. Who was it? I think it was Meenakshi Mukherjee, yes. She said that when she was writing her dissertation, or she was writing a book on Jane Austen, one of the things she did was she spent time in the British Library going through the newspapers, the magazines, and the novels, the popular novels of Jane Austen's time, because she said these things would have influenced Jane Austen. See, that kind of background you should do when you're translating. What is the material that would have influenced my writer? If it's a recent writer, it's okay. I mean, you and he or you and she are influenced by the same things. But if your writer is somebody who lived 30 years ago, 40 years ago, you have to try and enter that space in order to see what those influences might have been. There's something I wanted to say. Okay, I've forgotten now. But yes, building up your own vocabulary. So, when your mind is fresh in the morning, don't look at your WhatsApp, don't look at the newspapers, don't look at the TV. You read really good writing if you're translating to English. Let's say something from the 19th century, read some poetry, read a bit of Shakespeare, read his sonnets, read John Donne. Then you can read early 20th century something, just to, it's like a musician tuning up. You have to tune up your vocabulary, the creative side of you. Just read it, because it'll all become part of you. The things that you read become a part of you. And if you can, if people won't think you're nutty, you can read out some poetry, you can read it aloud, because that makes it even more a part of you. As anyone who sings will tell you, when they sing, that thing, the vocabulary, all of that becomes part of them. So I hope I've answered your question, Pooja.
Okay, thank you, ma'am.
Hello, ma'am.
Yes, who's that?
Myself, Alex Babu. I am from
Yes, Alex.
Newman College.
Yes, Alex.
My question is that You have been discussing about the translation of various books from regional language to the English language.
Yes.
And there are also books coming out from English language to the regional languages. And we nowadays we try to preserve our custom, culture, and so on. So, there is a conception or misconception among the readers, like there is an elite community that is existing in this English language speaking area, and so on. These customs or cultures, can they affect our society? The translation itself, they bring out their culture, their way of living and so on into the regional language. So will there be an affecting of culture or custom?
Yes, of course. The Bible, how did the Bible affect cultures? How many hundreds of translations have there been of the Bible? In Malayalam itself, how many translations are there? If you read the speeches, if you read the sermons, the meditations of Carl Newman, if you were to bring it into Malayalam, it would be a wonderful, wonderful impact, wouldn't it? See, it's up to you what you read. It's up to you how. It doesn't have to be translated. Even without translation, we are being the vibrations of other cultures, whether it is in conflict with us or enriches us, whatever those vibrations are hitting us all the time. The thing is, what do you choose to adapt and adopt or interpret as useful for yourself? It's no use being afraid of other influences, and you have to take the good with the bad. My great fear is this handheld internet, which continuously interferes with deeper thinking, deeper reflection, which, there's this instant gratification. Something is amusing, something is irritating. Each of those things affects your brain, affects your mind. That is where the damage is being done, not concepts. That's my answer to you, Alex.
Okay, thank you, ma'am.
Hello, Mini. This is Professor Venkatramanan from the University of Madras, Department of English. I know each translated text is a kind of a cultural capsule, and glossary plays a very major role. But where can we actually draw the line? Because too much of glossary also becomes an encumbrance. But do you think a glossary is needed? And if so, where do we actually draw the line as a translator?
It is up to you. There are 2 or 3 things you can do. One is to explain simple things. Use the Tamil or the Malayalam or the Hindi. Use that term, comma, quickly give the English and move on the first time you use it. The other thing you can do is a footnote, which is what I did right through in the early Macmillan translations. I was heavily criticized for it. But in the UK, when those books were distributed, they were very, very warmly appreciated. They just loved those footnotes. Some of those books like Lamps in the Whirlpool and Yamini and which was the third? There was a Gujarati work. Those were actually adopted as textbooks and appreciated. But Meenakshi Mukherjee, S. Krishnan, Sajid Mukherjee all made fun of me and said, what is all this? These books are the order of textbooks. But in Oxford, I went even further. As I was supported by the group also, of course, because their mandate is research and things like that. We had footnotes, we had very long academic introductions. We also had glossaries. Now, my answer to this is, if you need the glossary, use it. If you don't need it, don't use it. But if a reader needs explanations, it is your duty to provide it. There's a marvelous work which Katha brought out, and I feel very angry with Gita that she didn't give explanations. It's called the Heart's Desire or something like that. It's a Krishna Sokti work. It's set in early 20th century old Delhi, where there is a Muslim courtesan, and she becomes almost a lifelong mistress of a Seth who has his own family. The number of words for Okay, if it's something to do with food, it's all right. But there are certain cultural things there where she is established in a particular place and there's something to do with the festival. Those words are so casually used. It's not even Hindi, it's that Hindustani, that peculiar kind of language which Krishna Sokti is so good at. And no explanations at all. So I felt very frustrated when I read that book. The Heart Has Its Reasons. Yeah, that's the title. A fabulous book, but I would say it's flawed because not only is there no glossary, there isn't even an introduction. At least the author could have said something which the translator could have translated. So I don't find a glossary or a footnote or something like that offensive at all. Where do you draw the line? That's up to you. If you're translating something from the 19th century, if you're translating something like Anandamath, of course you have to give all those explanations. Why did the sannyasis all come out of their forests or wherever it is they were? Why did they protest? Because there is a historical background there. Suddenly the British brought taxes and there was that revolt. And also the social practices, which it won't be at all clear to somebody who is not familiar with maybe parda or the customs that go with a young girl coming of age or whatever thing. Then the social patterns of behavior also, the early 20th century or late 19th century, just when society was changing, when women's education, these things have to be explained. Otherwise, it's very mysterious to somebody who can't understand pujas, rituals, the jokes between Hindus and Muslims. Why is Raza has this thing, Topi Shukla. They make fun of that man because he's very close to Muslims and they call him Topi. Why Topi? Because, Muslims wear the Topi, but to the uninitiated person, they won't understand why Topi. So that's my answer, Raman.
Thank you, Meena. Thank you so much.
Hello, ma'am. Good morning, ma'am. Joel from Newman College.
Yes, Joel.
Ma'am, I have a question for you.
Yes.
Ma'am, what is the essence of translation and what is that element which makes the translation one?
What is the essence of translation?
And what is that element which makes the translation the most perfect one?
There's no perfect translation, first of all. Forget it. I'm talking about literary texts. If it's a prose text, if it's a travelogue, if it's a document of, if it's a diary, this happened at such and such date, that's possible. Perfection is possible. The essence of translation is to carry meaning and culture, not just word for word. And you can't really expect perfection. The famous translator Ramanujan said, I can never complete a translation, I can only abandon it. And it's also the reason why there are so many translations, so many different versions of famous works. Your own Indulekha, went through so many translations. Sometime in the 60s, the one Leela, somebody translated it where they took out all the serious, that 18th chapter was dropped completely. And it was just treated as a romance. So, you can do all sorts of things. But unless you carry through the meaning which the author intended the reader to see in the original, there you have failed. If you fail to carry the meaning through. And if you fail the other 50%, if you fail to use the cultural equivalents which the target language readers need, because they need so much more scaffolding. See, that's why I say our translations, primary market is we ourselves, because as you read the English, if you're a Tamilian, if you're a Tamil speaker reading a translation of a Tamil work in English, and you know Tamil, okay, you don't know the language, but you know the culture, you know the language. As you read, one half of your mind is supplying all the words in Tamil. You describe a street scene in Madurai, and of course, you know exactly what it looks like. But there's also the word picture here. Okay, once removed, if you are somewhere else in India, you've never visited Tamil Nadu, you can kind of guess because conditions may not be that different. But if you're outside, if you're somewhere in Singapore where you never come out of that bubble, then you need a lot of help. If you're even further away, in the West, where you're not even in an Asian culture, you need even more help. So that's my answer to perfection and approximations.
Ma'am?
Yes?
Ma'am, you said there is no perfect translation. If so, isn't everything in a way a transcreation? Do you think there really exists a difference between translation and transcreation?
Actually, it doesn't matter what I think. And I said earlier I can't remember which was, to Pooja, I think, that all translation is transcreation. You are creating. You have to be creative when you translate. The word translate is to translocate, to transform, to transmute. But actually, you're creating. In this other language, you're creating that same image, that same. It's actually a sort of a phantom world you're creating. So these are all nice distinctions. And P. Lal was the person who brought up that phrase, transcreation, where you paraphrase, you rewrite, you reinterpret for the readership that doesn't know the original language.
Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you.
It looks like we have covered all our questions. It looks like we have covered all our questions. We have come to the end of this section. Now I welcome Dr. Bijimal Thomas, Head of the Department of English, Newman College, Thodupuzha, to propose the vote of thanks.
So good morning, everybody. Good morning, ma'am.
Good morning, ma'am.
Our esteemed resource person, Dr. Mini Krishnan, my colleagues in and off on the online platform, teachers, research scholars, and my dear students. We are really grateful to you, ma'am, for the excellent coverage of the topic, networking to translation, race, gender, class for region. With perfect knowledge, you shared your expertise in a very simple and genuine manner. You explained to us the hidden power of translation with a number of examples. As you stated, translations can help the humanities to make a brilliant comeback in a global sense and proved that translators can be second writers. I read somewhere that your life begins and ends with books. It is truly evident in your presentation. You could provide us with an array of books and translations. As stated, the translation is essentially a reconceptualization of some untranslatable original. On behalf of Newman community and the organizing committee of this seminar, I extend our deepfelt gratitude to you, ma'am.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for sparing your valuable time for us. Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Ajomi, thank you.
Yes, ma'am. My microphone was muted. We are really honored to have you among us. Thank you, ma'am, for joining us.
Thank you. After all this COVID and all that's over, I'll come over and do a workshop for you.
Definitely, ma'am. Definitely, ma'am.
Shall I leave the meeting now?
Okay, ma'am.
Thank you, everybody. Thank you.
Okay. Yeah.